Today we're going to learn how to set up a timer in order to loop animations using SF symbols, and then we're going to learn how to animate the UI using the new animation timing such as spring in Swiftui 5. So let's get started. Now the first thing we're going to do is to set up the timer. And this can be useful for a number of reasons, such as you want to program a clock or a countdown. And in this case, we're using it to set the animation to loop. So the first thing is to set the state var time is equal to date.now. Next, we're going to set the function that is going to run the time. So let timer is equal to timer.publish. And here we're going to set to every second. So 1 would be 1 second running on .main in .common. And then at the end of the parentheses, we're going to set auto connect. Using this timer that is constantly changing, we're going to listen to it. And then we're going to store whatever value that we're getting from this into the state that is time. So to do that, we're going to go to any element where you want to run that code. So let's go to the bell icon, which is this one. And then we're going to use a modifier called onReceive. So this is going to listen to the timer. So any change that we're receiving, we're going to get that value. Now for perform, just press enter. And typically you're going to have the closure, so the curly braces. And then you're going to have something in. Now that something is going to be called value. And we're going to store that inside the state time. So time is equal to value. Now remember that whenever we press on the play icon, it's changing the state, which is a Boolean, and then that value, whenever we change, is going to animate the bell icon. So you can see here, but then we're going to change that to whenever the time is changing. And so you can see that it's constantly running the animation every second. One thing to note is that depending on the type of animation that you're using, some of them is going to use a value and some of them is going to use a isActive. For example, here we have the scale up on the magnifying glass. So I'm going to scroll up a little bit to find that magnifying glass, and then looking at the documentation by option clicking, I can see that I have the option to set to isActive, which is of type Boolean. And now what I'm going to do is to set isActive. And here I need a Boolean, which I'm going to name isActive as well. So let me declare this state. I'm going to set to state var isActive is equal to false by default. Now I'm going to go to onReceive on the bell. And this is where every second that the timer is running, I'm also going to change the isActive state by using toggle. So this time, instead of using the time value, I'm going to use this active state that I just declared. And I'm going to put that to the isActive symbol effect. Now, what you're going to notice is that it's going to loop my scale up animation right here. So both isActive and value is going to pretty much do the same thing, which is to listen to the changes. The only difference is that one is going to use a Boolean and the other one is going to use a value. Then we also have the appear animation that we're going to apply on the face icon. So I'm going to use symbol effect. And here I'm going to use effect and value. For the effect, I'm going to set to dot appear. And here, the value, if I set it to 1, it's going to give me an error. And that's because, as I mentioned before, some of the animation is going to accept the value and some is going to use isActive. So in this case, if I set to isActive, it's going to work. Great. Now we're going to focus back on the tap animation. So I'm going to scroll down to find the bell icon, which I'm going to put back to is tapped. I think it's going to look a little bit better. So now I have this little animation, and what I'm going to do is to maximize the image and move things around a little bit. So let me scroll up to the top. And here, the first thing I'm going to animate on the tap, I'm going to change the frame size. So we're going to start with the height, and I'm going to set the condition. So is tap question mark, set it to 600, otherwise 300. Now you're going to see that it's changing the size of the image. I can also limit the width. So I'm going to set another modifier for frame using width is tapped question mark 393, otherwise 360. So it looks a little bit better. Now, one thing you're noticing is that when I do the state change, it does not do the transition. So to fix that, we're going to go to where the state is changing. So for example, on tap gesture or on receive, in this case is tap.toggle, and we have to wrap that inside with animation. And you can press enter. Now you're going to move that code inside the curly braces. So you're going to see that this is the default transition. It's pretty cool. You can also change the animation timing. To do that, we're going to set with animation parentheses, and here we have a bunch of presets such as the really popular ease in and out. So you have a bit of easing at the beginning or at the end. So most applications that has prototyping or animations is going to default to either ease out or ease in out. So it's pretty popular, and I believe it's a default with animation. As you can see here, it's very similar. Now, what is new is that you can set also to bouncy, to smooth, snappy, and also customize the spring. So here, bouncy is pretty neat. You're gonna see that it bounced a little bit. Apple used this a lot in their animations. Now, depending on the distance of the animation, so for example, if it goes to be a really, really big image size, then it's going to bounce more or less. You can also change to something like snappy to make it less bouncy, but still has that organic feeling, that springiness. I like it bouncy, so I'm going to put it back and scroll back to the top to change a little bit more. So one thing I'm going to do is to change the corner radius. So is tap question mark, set it to 0, otherwise 20. And here you're going to see that it's animating the corner radius, which is very useful if, for example, you're changing to a full screen mode. And I'm just need to move this up a little bit to the top of the screen. Let's set the offset to a Y is tapped question mark minus 200, otherwise 0. So this is going to move this to the top of the screen. I'm doing everything manually for now to make things simple. But if later on you want to make this screen adaptive, you can detect the screen size and replace these hard-coded values with dynamic values using Geometry Reader and a bunch of other preset values. So you can check the SwiftUI handbook, or you can also check my previous SwiftUI courses. Next, I'm going to move these two elements a little bit. So I'm going to scroll to this V-stack here. And for the offset of the V-stack, I'm going to set is tapped question mark 220, otherwise 80. Then I'm going to move to the H stack. And for the offset, I'm going to set is tapped question mark 40, otherwise minus 44. So this is what I have so far. And it does a pretty good job organizing the content and focusing on the actual video. I'm going to fix the padding a little bit here. So for the Z stack, I'm going to remove the padding of 20. And then on the V stack, I'm going to set a padding of 40. So this is going to be a little bit more consistent. It's going to fix that problem with the text that is animating. So the next thing we're going to do is to only show these icons when I have the full screen mode. So by default, it's only going to show the play icon. So let's move to the H stack. And here I'm going to go to the first wand icon and set opacity modifier is tapped question mark to 1, otherwise 0. So it's simply going to show when we are in full screen mode. I'm going to copy and paste this to be the same for the bell icon. And typically you want to set this before the events, such as gesture or receive. So I'm going to put this before, and it's going to hide and show. Then I can also do something that is increasingly popular on Apple platforms, which is to use the blur. You can see a lot in the dynamic island animations. So let's move next to opacity. I'm going to add blur using a radius value. And in this case, it's tapped question mark 0, otherwise 20. So now we have a little bit of a blur animation. I'm also going to copy this blur next to opacity for the bell icon. All right. Finally, we need to take care of the frame size. So we're going to go to the H stack. And right now, what you're noticing is that this container is taking the size of the elements. So this is very typical. For example, if I remove that image, it's going to make it smaller. But you can also set it to a fixed size by using the frame modifier. So right before, I'm going to set frame using the width. And here, I'm going to set to is tapped question mark to 20, otherwise 50. So now we have a fixed size, and also we're animating it like this. All right, I hope you enjoyed it. In the next section, we're going to learn about the new phase animator, allowing you to animate in a sequence, and very similar to the keyframe animation in CSS. So I'll see you in the next section.